The moment you need their approval, you have already lost. Sit with that. Do not rush past it. Because somewhere in the last week, in a meeting, in a conversation, in a text message you sent and then watched with a kind of quiet desperation, you felt that loss. You may not have named it. You may have told yourself you were simply being kind, being helpful, being loyal, being present. But underneath that story, something registered the truth. You were performing. And the performance was not for yourself. There is a particular kind of person who moves through the world over-explaining themselves, who apologizes before they have done anything wrong, who laughs a half-second before it is socially required, just to signal that they are not a threat, who gives their time, their energy, their attention without being asked, and then watches, with a confusion that borders on grief, as the people they give most to treat them as though they are somehow worth the least. This person is not weak. This person is not broken. This person is operating on a map that describes a world that does not exist, a world where effort guarantees recognition, where availability earns love, where being the most giving person in any room automatically makes you the most valued one. That map is wrong, and carrying it has been costing you more than you know. Every time you enter a room, every time you send a message, take a meeting, join a conversation, an assessment is happening. It is not conscious. It is not deliberate. It is not even unkind. It is simply the ancient human nervous system doing what it has always done, scanning for status, reading behavioral signals and sorting people into categories of high value and low value within seconds. You do it too, to everyone you meet. You cannot stop it, because it was not designed for your awareness. It was designed for your survival, and the signals it reads are not the ones you think it reads. It does not read your resume. It does not read your kindness or your loyalty, or the years you have given to a friendship, a company, a relationship. It reads behavior. It reads pattern. It reads the specific, observable things you do in the presence of others. And it draws its conclusions from those, not from your intentions, not from your worth as a person, and not from the story you are telling yourself about who you are. The signals of low value are precise. They are over-explaining a decision that needed no defense, apologizing for a statement before the statement is finished, laughing too quickly at something that was not quite funny, just to keep the atmosphere safe, volunteering more information than was asked for, agreeing before you've finished thinking. These behaviors, individually, seem minor. They seem social, they seem considerate, but accumulated across thousands of interactions over months and years, they form a pattern. And that pattern is read, below conscious awareness, but with absolute accuracy, as the pattern of someone who does not fully believe in their own worth. Someone who is perpetually seeking ratification. The evolutionary psychology beneath this is not cruel, it is structural. Human social hierarchies self-organize around behavioral signals because behavioral signals are the most reliable real-time data available. A person who behaves as though their position is uncertain signals that their position is in fact uncertain, and the responding brain does not ask whether this is fair. It simply responds to what it observes. This is what creates the invisible tax. It is the compounding cost of broadcasting low-value signals over time. Not dramatic, not announced, simply a slow erosion, less consideration in the plans others make, less urgency when you need something, less desire from the people you most want to desire you, less recognition in the spaces where you have worked the hardest. It accumulates the way debt accumulates, quietly, until one day you look at the number and understand that you have been paying interest on something for years. But this is only the beginning, because the tax is not arbitrary. It is tied to a mechanism, and once you understand the mechanism, the tax becomes optional. There is a law that governs perceived value in human psychology. It is not a theory. It is not a philosophy. It is a mechanism, as reliable as pressure, as indifferent as gravity. And it operates identically whether the subject is a commodity, an opportunity, or a person. Scarcity creates value. This is not a theory. This is a law. The human brain does not assess value based on quality alone. It assesses value based on availability. What is rare is precious, what is abundant is common. What is common is, by definition, replaceable, and what is replaceable is, by definition, not fully respected. This is not a cultural artifact. It is not a modern pathology. It is the operating logic of a nervous system that evolved in conditions of genuine scarcity, where the rare thing, the hard-to-find thing, was almost always the more valuable one. That wiring did not change because abundance became possible. It remained, and it still governs the way every person on Earth subconsciously evaluates every other person on Earth. The neurological mechanism is this. The brain's reward system is built not on certainty but on anticipation. Dopamine, the chemical of motivation, of pursuit, of engagement, does not fire on receiving the reward. It fires on the possibility of receiving it. This is why intermittent reinforcement is more psychologically powerful than constant reinforcement. It is why the person who responds to every message within seconds becomes, over time, less compelling than the person whose responses are unpredictable. Not because the second person is smarter or kinder or more interesting, but because the brain of the recipient has been conditioned to pursue what is not guaranteed. Consider the specific case of digital communication. Two people of equivalent intelligence, equivalent humor, equivalent depth. One responds to every message within minutes, regardless of what they are doing, regardless of what the message deserves. The other responds when they choose to. Sometimes quickly, sometimes after hours, never with an explanation for the timing. The first person is unconsciously categorized as available. Available means the reward is guaranteed. Guaranteed rewards do not sustain pursuit. The second person remains categorized as uncertain. Uncertainty sustains pursuit. Human nature does not reward availability. Consider the professional environment. The employee who is always early, always willing, always first to volunteer for the additional project, always available for the question that should have been handled by someone else. This person is visible, yes, but they are visible the way furniture is visible, as reliable, as useful, and as unlikely to be elevated. They are the constant. And constants are not what systems reward. Systems reward scarcity. The person who is difficult to access, whose time carries a cost to obtain, who does not automatically redistribute their expertise to anyone who asks. This person is perceived as more valuable, not because they have withheld anything of substance, but because scarcity creates the perception of substance. The brutal truth of this mechanism is the hardest thing in this script to absorb, so absorb it fully. The person who is trying hardest to be valued is almost always the person being valued least, not because of cruelty, not because life is unfair, because the trying itself is the signal. The signal reads as need, and need, in the calculus of perceived worth, reads as low value. The mechanism does not care about your effort. It responds to your signal. Now the situation becomes even darker, because it is not simply that scarcity creates value. It is that availability actively destroys something that, once destroyed, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. That something is the psychological space in which desire, respect, and perceived worth are born. There is a principle in social psychology called reactance theory. The core of it is this: humans desire most intensely what they sense they are about to lose or cannot easily have. The moment a person believes they may not be able to access something, your time, your attention, your presence, your approval, a disproportionate desire for that thing is activated. It is not rational, it is not chosen, it is automatic, and it is one of the most powerful forces governing human behavior in relationships, in professional environments, in every social context where one person wants something from another. Constant availability eliminates this force entirely. There is nothing to lose, there is nothing uncertain. The outcome is guaranteed, and the brain, which is fundamentally a prediction machine that loses interest in confirmed predictions, disengages, not hostilely, not with intention. Simply, the tension that was the engine of pursuit disappears, and with it, the respect that tension generates. Intermittent reinforcement works in the opposite direction. When your presence is not guaranteed, when the other person does not know exactly when you will respond, whether you will be available, how much of your attention they will receive, their brain generates the psychological equivalent of pursuit. The uncertainty keeps the system engaged. This is not manipulation. It is the architecture of how human attention and desire actually function. The person who is always there has made themselves cognitively invisible through sheer predictability. Mystery is a form of power. Familiarity is its destruction. And here the concept of mystery must be rendered precisely, because it is almost always misunderstood. Mystery is not about being secretive. It is not about lying. It is not about performing distance you do not feel. Mystery, in the structural sense, is simply the presence of cognitive space. Space in which another person's imagination can operate. The person who explains every decision, narrates every emotion, shares every thought, and accounts for every absence has eliminated that space completely. There is nothing left for the other person's mind to engage with. Everything has been provided, and what is provided without effort, without pursuit, without uncertainty, is valued at the price of the effort it cost to obtain it, nothing. The over-explanation pattern is the most common and most costly form of this. Every time you explain a decision that required no explanation, you are doing something precise. You are submitting your behavior to the other person's judgment. You are saying, between the lines of every justification, that their assessment of your choices has power over whether you proceed with them. This is read, not consciously, but accurately, as a request for permission. And the brain that receives a request for permission automatically categorizes the person making the request as subordinate to the person receiving it. Status has been assigned, not harshly, not deliberately, mechanically. Most people never realize this. They believe that explaining themselves builds understanding. They believe that narrating their reasoning creates connection. What it creates, instead, is a structural hierarchy in which they are perpetually below the person they are explaining themselves to. Familiarity, in this sense, is not closeness. It is the extinction of tension. And without tension, there is no desire, no respect, and no perceived value, only the comfortable, static, deeply unexciting category of someone who is always just there. There is a moment that happens in every conflict, every negotiation, every test of social dynamics. It is a brief moment, and most people miss its significance entirely. It is the moment when one person reacts, not responds, reacts. The distinction is everything. The person who reacts emotionally, whose voice tightens, whose expression changes, who gives the other person the immediate, involuntary signal that something has landed, has already surrendered the most important thing in the interaction. They have surrendered control, not of the argument's outcome, of the perception of power, because what a reaction broadcasts to every observing nervous system in proximity is a single precise message. This person's state can be altered by external events, and a person whose state can be altered by external events is a person who can be managed. Marcus Aurelius understood this not as philosophy, but as strategy. His meditations are not the reflections of a man seeking comfort. They are the operating manual of a man who held the most powerful position in the known world, and understood that the only domain he could govern with certainty was his own response to events. The dichotomy he built his life around, between what is within our power and what is not an abstraction. It is the most practical power strategy ever articulated. What is within your power, how you respond, how you present, how much of your internal state you allow to become visible. What is not within your power, what others say, what they do, what they think. The person who reacts to the latter has abandoned the former. Epictetus was more direct, a man who had been enslaved, and who understood power, therefore, from the position of someone who had had it entirely removed, articulated the same principle with more edge. What disturbs you is not events themselves, but your judgments about them. And every judgment you render publicly, through an emotional reaction, is a piece of intelligence handed freely to the people around you. intelligence about where your limits are, intelligence about what levers move you. In a world where every social dynamic is also, in some sense, a negotiation, this intelligence is leverage, and you handed it over. The specific scenarios in which this operates are not rare, they are daily. In the workplace, the person who responds to criticism by defending, justifying, or visibly becoming upset is automatically perceived as less competent, not because the criticism was valid, but because the response to it revealed insecurity. The person who receives the same criticism without visible reaction, who processes it without performance, who asks a clarifying question in the same tone they might use to ask about the weather. This person is perceived as someone who has already considered the criticism and found it either useful or irrelevant. Both of these impressions communicate the same thing: control. And control communicates status. In relationships, emotional reactivity signals attachment, and attachment signals that leverage exists. The person who becomes visibly affected when you withdraw your attention has told you, with precision, exactly how to manage them. This is not about being cold. This is about the structural reality that vulnerability, displayed without choice, is an invitation to exploitation by anyone who wishes to exploit it. And this is the part that will disturb you most. The silence you have been interpreting as your weakness is not weakness at all. Silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. The pause after a provocation, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10, is not the absence of a response. It is a response more powerful than anything you could have spoken. It communicates that you have considered what was said and found it insufficient to move you. It communicates that your internal equilibrium does not depend on external conditions. It communicates, without a single word, the kind of certainty that makes people reconsider the position they took when they spoke. Strategic silence is not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. It is the silence of someone who has decided not to dignify the moment with a response. Master this. It is one of the few truly costless sources of power available to you. There is a confusion about boundaries that is so pervasive, so fundamental, that it has become invisible. Most people believe that a boundary is a statement, something you say, something you announce. I don't like when you do that. I need you to stop. That's not acceptable to me. These are not boundaries. These are requests dressed in the language of limits. And the difference matters enormously. A boundary is not a statement. It is a structure. It is built not from words but from consequences. And the person who announces their boundaries without enforcing them, who says the words, and then remains in the same position, accepts the same behavior, and continues the same dynamic, has not created a boundary at all. They have created a test. And the result of that test, every time it is administered, is this limit does not hold, and what does not hold is not a limit. It is a guideline. Guidelines are optional. Respect comes from consequences, not explanations. The deeper error is this. Every time you explain why you have a boundary, you are submitting that boundary to the other person's judgment. You are not saying, I will hold this limit. You are saying, I will hold this limit, contingent on your agreeing that it is reasonable. This is not a limit. This is a negotiation, one in which you have already conceded the most important point, which is that your limits exist independently of whether anyone else approves of them. The contrast is instructive. The person who acts without explanation, who simply removes themselves from a situation that has become unacceptable, who becomes less available when a relationship fails to meet a standard. Without announcing the withdrawal, without narrating the standard, without waiting for the other person to understand and agree. This person's behavior communicates something that words cannot certainty. They are not waiting for your approval. They are not asking you to validate their response. They are simply responding to their own internal standard. And the response is the statement. In a relationship, the person who says, I don't like it when you treat me this way, and then stays, and then says it again, and then stays again, has trained the other person to understand that this statement produces no consequence. The person who, the next time they are treated poorly, simply becomes less available. No speech, no announcement, no explanation, no return to full availability until the dynamic has shifted, has communicated something that no speech could communicate with equal precision, that there is a cost to this behavior, that the cost is real, and that it will be paid whether or not it is convenient for the person who incurred it. In the workplace, the employee who tells their manager that they are being taken advantage of, that they are being asked to absorb responsibilities beyond their scope, that this is unfair, and who then continues to absorb those responsibilities, continues to come in early, continues to do the work of two people, has established, through action, that the complaint produces nothing. The employee who simply stops offering excess time and expertise, quietly, without performance, without announcement, has established something else entirely, a boundary with a consequence. The absence of drama is itself a signal. It says, this is not a negotiation. This is simply how I operate. The person who acts without words is perceived as someone who does not require external permission for their own behavior. And that perception is not wrong. Here is where the real power begins. Everything in the previous 5 sections has been preparation for this. Because the most powerful position in any human dynamic, any negotiation, any relationship, any social equation, is not held by the most intelligent person, not by the most attractive, not by the one with the most obvious advantages. It is held by the person who is genuinely willing to leave, not the person who threatens to leave, not the person who performs detachment as a tactic, who says they are willing to walk away while internally hoping the bluff is never called. That person is among the most fragile in any dynamic, because the moment the other side senses the performance, and they will sense it, because the body communicates what the words deny, all leverage evaporates. The bluff, called, destroys the position entirely. The person willing to walk away holds all the power. But the power only exists when the willingness is real. To understand why, you need to understand what Kahneman and Tversky established about the asymmetric architecture of human psychology. Humans do not evaluate potential gains and potential losses on the same scale. The pain of losing something is felt approximately twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent thing. This is not a personality type. It is a neurological structure. It is universal. And what it means, applied to human dynamics, is this. The moment another person senses that you may withdraw, your attention, your presence, your business, your time, they are not thinking about what you are worth. They are thinking about what they are about to lose. And that calculation is more powerful, more motivating, and more behavior-changing than any positive offer you could make. The person who is desperately attached, who has only this relationship, only this job, only this opportunity, cannot produce this effect. Their attachment is visible. It radiates. Every negotiation they enter at a disadvantage, because their counterpart knows or senses that the cost of losing the deal is asymmetric. The attached person loses more by walking away than the other party loses by letting them walk. This is leverage, and it belongs to the other side, not to them. Now, consider the person who has built a life of genuine options, who has not put the full weight of their emotional and social world on one relationship, one friendship, one career. This person does not need to perform detachment. Their detachment is real because their options are real. When they enter a negotiation, a relationship, a dynamic, they are there because they choose to be, not because they need to be. This distinction is perceived immediately, without words, by every nervous system in proximity. It changes the energy of every interaction. It changes the terms of every negotiation, not through aggression, not through strategy, through the simple, quiet reality that this person can leave, and would. In the specific context of romantic dynamics, the person who has built a genuinely full life, real friendships, real work, real interests, real alternative sources of meaning, is not more attractive because they have performed confidence or learned the right words. They are more attractive because they are actually less available, actually less in need of this specific person's approval, and therefore actually more scarce. The scarcity is real. The value it generates is therefore real. It cannot be faked into existence. It must be built. In negotiation, every experienced negotiator knows that the party willing to walk away from a deal always extracts better terms, not because they are more aggressive, not because they are smarter, because their detachment removes the other party's primary source of leverage, which is the assumption that the deal must close. When one side knows the other side will leave if the terms are wrong, the terms become negotiated in earnest. Before that, they are performed in friendship. The person who is always more invested, who reaches out first, who makes the plans, who forgives without waiting, holds the least power in that dynamic. Not because their investment is wrong. Because investment, without reciprocity, signals that the relationship matters more to one party than to the other, and the party for whom it matters less holds the power to set its terms. This is not cruelty. It is the structural logic of scarcity applied to human connection. Let that sit with you for a moment, because what you have just understood is not a trick. It is not a technique. It is the underlying architecture of every social dynamic you have ever been part of. The ones where you felt respected and the ones where you did not. The variable was not your worth. It was not your effort. It was how available you were and what you were willing to lose. The work begins now, not gradually, not when you feel ready, not after one more day of watching the old pattern play itself out. The work begins in the next interaction you have, in the next message you consider sending, the next decision you feel the urge to explain, the next conflict in which you feel the pull to react. Eliminate over-explanation immediately, not as an experiment, not as a temporary adjustment, immediately and permanently. The next time you make a decision about your time, your attention, your availability, your preferences, you do not explain it, you make it. This applies to the small decisions as much as the large ones, because the small ones are where the pattern lives. The large moments of self-betrayal are built from the accumulated architecture of the small ones. The muscle of non-explanation must be developed in low-stakes environments so that it is automatic when the stakes are high. Decision, then action, not decision, then defense, then justification, then apology for the justification. Reduce your availability, deliberately, strategically, and without announcement. This is not about becoming cold, in the precise sense that creates value. You do not tell anyone you are becoming less available. The moment you announce the withdrawal, you have submitted the withdrawal to the other person's approval, which defeats the entire purpose. You simply respond more slowly to messages that do not deserve urgency. You decline invitations without constructing elaborate justifications. You let gaps appear in your accessibility that were not there before, and you observe, with the precision of someone who now understands the mechanism, how the perception of your value adjusts accordingly. In conflict, practice the strategic silence discussed in Section 4. When something is said to provoke you, in a meeting, in a relationship, in any environment where someone is testing the location of your limits, do not respond immediately. 3 seconds of silence after a provocation is not passivity. It is a statement of control more articulate than any sentence you could construct in that moment. It says, "I have considered what you said, and I have decided what it is worth." Let that decision be visible in the silence before you speak. The deepest work in this section is also the least visible. Building an internal standard that does not require external ratification. This is not arrogance. Arrogance is insecurity wearing a costume, the loud assertion of worth by someone who is not entirely certain of it, and therefore must announce it frequently. What you are building is different. It is the quiet, stable relationship with your own judgment that makes other people's approval or disapproval genuinely, not performatively, beside the point. You know what you stand for. You know what you have thought about and decided. You do not need to announce it, because you do not need the announcement confirmed. This is a practice. It is built through the daily application of making decisions and declining to justify them, holding standards and declining to explain them, withdrawing presence when presence is not being respected, and doing all of this without drama, without announcement, and without return, until the dynamic has earned the return. Audit your behavioral patterns with the cold specificity of someone reading a financial statement. Where are you over-available? Where are you reacting when observation would serve you better? Where are you seeking permission for decisions that belong entirely to you? These are not character flaws. They are learned behaviors, trained into you by environments that rewarded accommodation, that penalized self-possession, that taught you, through repetition, that your worth was contingent on other people's comfort. You are not disrespected because people are cruel. You are disrespected because you have trained them to be. This is the hardest sentence in this script, not because it blames you. It does not. It simply names the mechanism with precision you trained them, not with malice, not with intention, with pattern, and what was trained can be untrained. Through the same mechanism, applied in the opposite direction. New pattern, new signal, new categorical assessment, happening below conscious awareness. In every room you enter from this day forward, the person who pressed play at the beginning of this video is not the same person who has arrived here. Not because of motivation. Motivation is weather, and weather passes. Because of understanding. And understanding, once it is genuine, cannot be reversed. You now see something you could not see before. The precise architecture of every social dynamic you have ever navigated. Every text message has a power structure. Every silence has weight. Every explanation you were never required to give was a small surrender. Every time you were the one who reached out first, gave first, forgave first, without waiting. You were placing a bid in an auction in which the currency is scarcity, and you were bidding too much. Not because you are too much. Because you did not know the rules of the auction. Now you do. What you carry forward from this is not a set of tactics, it is a way of seeing. The person who has absorbed these 8 sections does not need to calculate their response to every interaction, because the underlying principle is simple enough to operate on instinct. Value is a function of scarcity. Scarcity is a function of genuine options, and genuine options are a function of a life built wide enough that no single person, no single opportunity, no single outcome has the power to complete you or destroy you. Build that life, not as a strategy, as a fact. In the comments below, name the single behavior you are eliminating first. Not the most dramatic one, not the one that sounds most impressive to say out loud. The one that costs you most, that you recognize most precisely, that you have been performing longest without realizing it was a performance. Name it. The act of naming is not small. It is the first act of the new identity. The moment the pattern becomes visible enough to be changed. What comes next, in the video that follows this one, is the next layer. This script has shown you the mechanism of perceived value. What follows will show you how power is acquired and maintained in the specific environments where you are most exposed, with a precision that this video was designed to prepare you for. If you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now, not for content, for the continuation of a conversation that has, if this script has done its work, already changed something in you that will not change back. You are not the person who explains themselves to rooms that have already decided. You are not the person who waits for a text with a kind of hollow urgency. You are not the person who is present for everyone and remembered by no one. You know the law now. Apply it without apology. The world responds to signal. Change the signal. The world will follow.